welcome back. I'm so honored to be presenting and speaking with Marisa Radha Weppner today. Hi, Radha.
Yes. Hello.
I'm like, should I call you Radha or should I call you Marisa? Little of both.
Either is great. I love Radha and I love Marisa. I usually don't go by Marisa Radha. I don't combine them.
There you go. Okay, we'll go by Radha today.
Okay.
So Radha is a mom, author, DJ, teacher, minister, psychedelic therapist, community organizer, life coach, podcaster, and entrepreneur. She has taught yoga since 2002. Known for her authentic self-expression, humorous yet grounded self-expression, she empowers others to embody their soul's wisdom, bringing a real-world mix of Eastern spirituality and Western psychology to her students for remembering, empowerment, and transformation. Her life is dedicated to the study of yoga, specializing in yoga psychology, bhakti yoga, yoga history and philosophy, yin, yoga nidra, meditation, and self-awakening yoga. She can be found leading classes on Insight Timer or from her studio Source Meditation Space in Boise, Idaho. She works as a ketamine-assisted therapist at the Boise Ketamine Clinic as well. Her online yoga classes and book, Vinyasa Yoga Made Simple, 27 Days of Self-Discovery, are available through Udaya.com.
Udaya.
Udaya. I don't know them. That's great. Love learning something new every day. And you can listen to her meditation album Guidance on all streaming platforms or tune into her podcast, Love, Service, Wisdom. All of these offerings are inspired by her own growth and transformation and healing yoga and psychedelic and shadow integration. As a lover of the wild and free, she has taught at festivals all over the world like Burning Man, Bonnaroo, Ram Dass Retreats, the Entheo Wheel Symbiosis Gathering, Eclipse Festival, WTF. I don't know that festival.
It's a good one.
I'm like, that sounds fun.
Rest in peace, WTF. It was a boutique festival in Portland or in Oregon.
Amazing. And the Women and Leadership Conference and Sun Valley Wellness Fest. She humbly connects with a deep legacy of wisdom by being on faculty at Esalen Institute. As a passion project that weaves together her love of music, yoga, and community, she's also the co-director and producer of Yoga Fort for Tree Fort Music Fest. Wow, what an incredible background. And I'll never forget when I met you. I can't even remember what year that was. Feels like eons ago. I remember just being so impressed by you because, we have your partner is a common friend, East Forest, AKA Krishna. But Radha, let's hear a little bit about your journey. I really like to showcase people's journeys to getting out there. Now you're working in the psychedelic space. You're part of, Journey Space app. You've been entrenched in this world of yoga and mindfulness and teaching. I'm curious, were you on this path from childhood or did you take some kind of indirect route to go into, let's say, I always say corporate law? Were you a corporate attorney at one point?
No, I would say I've been on this path since I was a teenager. When I was 15, I had my first psychedelic experience with LSD, and it really actually destroyed me. It was like shamanic death, horrible, really very painful for almost the entire duration of it. So that was probably like around 1995. And I was so broken after that. I didn't have the word integration, but I was trying to integrate, but I didn't know that then. But that's what I was trying to do on my own, pre-internet. So all I had was essentially used bookstores looking for answers, Abraxas books in Daytona Beach, and found their Eastern spirituality section. And that started to give me kind of clues to what that was and what might be happening. I was raised Roman Catholic. And so when I had that LSD experience, I was essentially left with, there's a lot more going on than I've been told to the nature of reality. And I was left with the questions, what is God? What does it mean to be human? What is reality? So at 15, I was trying to answer those questions. And that's essentially been my life journey in a way. And through trying to integrate, I finally found yoga around 19 out of a book Richard Hittleman's 28-day exercise plan. It's like a book from the 70s that I would lay open on the floor. I was maybe a sophomore, junior in college, and do the practices from this woman that was wearing like a black leotard. It was like a black and white book, just practicing out of a book in my room and studying psychology in undergrad. And I noticed that I was changing without trying to change, meaning like when I was doing this little yoga practice, I was like naturally eating better. And I noticed I'd stopped like smoking cigarettes casually when we were out drinking or partying as college kids do. And I was much more like calm and patient. And so that was really inspiring to me and really motivated me to become a yoga teacher, because I thought I could teach people yoga and they'd change or maybe begin to change or grow without like it being super direct. Like, this is what you're doing. It could be sort of like on the periphery. And that was really awesome to me. And so that was back in 2000. I was actually in school then in Sarasota, where MAPS was at the time, where Rick Doblin was at the time. And so when I was down there in Sarasota at New College, we would go to Rick's house and party and hang out. And again, MAPS was there. A lot of my boyfriend at the time and his new partner, like they worked for Rick for a long time when he went back to Santa Cruz. So psychedelics were always kind of in there. And of course, as a college kid, especially down there where MAPS was, with the use of psychedelics was present. But because of my early experience, I have only seen psychedelics as like they're only spiritual for me, let's say. I have never really been able to tap into like just party aspect of drugs, because I got slammed my first time and I have a deep reverence for them. And so then psychedelics were present then, but I never felt like it was going to become what it was with psychedelics. And even when I went to graduate school, I was at the Institute of Transpersonal Psychology. It's kind of a sister school to CIIS in Palo Alto, and studying transpersonal psychology. And, you know, James Fadiman's on faculty and people like that, like early psychedelic pioneers. We literally didn't talk about psychedelics. So this was around like 2005, 2007 that I was doing that. And I'd become a yoga teacher by that point and teaching yoga, but wanting to be in the field of psychology, but still using yoga as the gateway into the self for this deeper self exploration. And then around 2014, feeling like, and then to back up a little bit too, being a part of Reality Sandwich. I think you were part of Reality Sandwich, right?
I was, you know what? I used to volunteer at some things in the city, New
Yeah.
York, back in the days.
Yeah. This is like 2008, 2009, right? Early in that. And so that was kind of my pod too. Like I started the sport in Seattle. I started the sport in Boise when I moved here. I went down to the ranch for those Reality Sandwich retreats, 2009, 10, 11. And that's essentially then how I met East Forest Krishna, but he wasn't there, but Michael Robinson introduced us. Oh, Michael. So then we had kind of like a similar pool of people from those days too. Like I remember when there was that Reality Sandwich retreat in Chimbre, the ayahuasca retreat back in like 2010 maybe or 11. I went down for that and was the yoga and meditation teacher for that through Reality Sandwich. So that the psychedelic piece was always kind of present, but not working with it directly, more of like a preparation guide or integration guide. Again, not really having those words at that point for what that was. And then started doing some more life coaching in 2014 to take the students that I had in yoga and meditation deeper into their transformation. And then in 2019, I finally had my first clinical therapeutic ketamine experience, and a light bulb just went off. That was like, wow, this is a psychedelic that's totally legal, above board. People are doing it in clinic. I can do this. I can lead this. And so that was in Denver where I had that experience. And I came back to Boise and I just like Googled like ketamine clinic Boise. And I found the Boise Ketamine Clinic. And I just did a cold call, essentially email, where it was like, this is who I am. This is my background and history. Would you be open to possibly working together, because in that space you need what's called a provider, like somebody who's
Mm-hmm.
writing the scripts for the medicine. And the woman that runs the clinic, at first she was kind of like, no, like what kind of, like more like thinking IVIM route, like how would you do an IV and IM, that kind of thing. And I said, no, I just want to work with troches. I want to work with lozenges. And she's like, oh, okay. Yeah, that could maybe work. And then I love learning. And I had already signed up to do the Ketamine Training Institute's like 5-day program for that spring. And so I said to her, I'm going to get this training and we'll circle back when I get the training and then we'll talk again. And so the training was set for April of 2020. Then obviously it didn't happen, right? And everything fell apart. And I was like, oh, okay. And I reached out and I said, they canceled it. I don't know when it's going to happen again. We never knew anything at that point in time. And a month or so goes by. And actually Krishna said to me, he's like, you didn't have to get the training to work with Nicole at the clinic. You were just doing that because you wanted to.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, oh yeah, you're right. So maybe I'll just ask her what she would want to feel good working with me, because that's essentially it. Because the provider's license is online as a medical provider if something were to go wrong. So I wrote her again and I said, what would you want for us to begin if we created our own training, let's say? And she said, okay, yeah, let's do that. She's like, read the Ketamine Papers, which was the book we were reading anyways for the Training Institute. And then come in and get an IV session so you know what that's like. And then you're already overqualified. Let's just begin. And let's begin with groups. And I hadn't planned on beginning with groups, but I said, all right, let's do it. And so now I've been working with them for almost the past 2.5 years, leading group ketamine experiences. And then now working a lot more, less with troches individually and more with IV and IM. And then additionally, once I started working in the ketamine space, I felt like I need a little bit more expertise working specifically with trauma, because that's what's coming up. This is the work I'm doing now. And I am in the Somatic Experiencing practitioner training. So that's the work of Peter Levine and Waking the Tiger and healing trauma through the body, which just perfectly dovetails with my love of yoga and meditation. And essentially, yoga and meditation being a form of that, because it's all about nervous system resets. Yoga is a nervous system experience. Somatic experiencing is a nervous system experience. So now doing a lot of the somatic experiencing work too with the ketamine therapy.
Which is so important. I personally keep saying without a somatic piece, with the integration and the therapeutic type work with any psychedelic, it sounds pretty extreme to say it's nearly useless, but it's like that's where the real healing is. We need to address all these levels, right?
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally. When I work with folks too, a lot of it's like, I'm just helping you become a more aware, mature adult by teaching you how to listen to and understand your body.
Mm-hmm.
Really, your body's it. Your body's telling you things all the time.
Mm-hmm.
You have to be able to pay attention to it.
Yeah. And so many people are just, completely in their head and out of their bodies. I mean, we all know on some level that this to me is the trauma of our entire society. And it's like, this is where things are heading, even with this whole, psychedelic renaissance and the rapid rate it's growing. I keep saying, I'm like, I think this is all just going to bring us back into the body. That's my theory. That's
No,
my
it
hope.
is. I'm totally in line with that. That's exactly what I see happening. And that's exactly the work that I do. And it's highly therapeutic and healing. Like it does work. I see it every week with people.
Yeah, let me ask a few things about ketamine, because I've been having these conversations recently about is ketamine really that effective, and where's the future of it heading? And maybe now with MDMA becoming hopefully legalized in the next year and a half, 2 years, psilocybin in certain states. But over the last year, I've met a few people who say they are now taking ketamine weekly. It's supposed to be therapeutic. I'm not sure if they're actually doing an actual therapy session weekly, but I started to question, is this really the replacement for, let's say, an antidepressant or a Xanax type drug. I mean, what are your views on this ketamine becoming, it's therapeutic, but then becoming maybe just a replacement for the way things were being done?
I feel what I've seen is it be incredibly therapeutic for people who feel stuck, where it's like, I've been on antidepressants forever. I've tried every type of therapy and I'm just stuck. Or maybe they haven't done that, but they still feel really stuck. That's a common theme. And so then we have the ketamine experience coupled with the therapy, and they get unstuck. They do. Their thought patterns change. They have new neurotransmitters given to them from the ketamine experience. Their body gets set to parasympathetic because it's an anesthetic, which they haven't been able to access, right? Calming themselves hasn't happened at all. And they have just a greater ability to have more empathy and compassion. And that, what I hear too from patients is like, say I'm anxious, and it's like, I did the ketamine experience and now I see or hear the anxious thought, but I have a buffer between it, and I can be more at choice of like, I'm not going to think or believe that anymore. So it creates more of a response versus a reaction in people. And then on the other end of the spectrum, probably there are people that do tend to maybe then abuse it and use it weakly. I would only think, and I'm not an expert, but it wouldn't need to be used weekly unless you were really in crisis. If you were really in crisis. But even just like last week, I had a patient. Let's see if I can describe this case study. It was a young girl. She's 19. And she was in an accident 10 months ago and is now a paraplegic. She was paralyzed from the waist down. She came in and really wouldn't even make eye contact, couldn't even be in conversation, very not combative, but like aggressive. And like, I have a 19-year-old teenager, right? So imagine a teenager attitude who's been highly traumatized, is incredibly depressed, and is suicidal and doesn't want to be there. It's just like, I want to end my life. I should be able to have assisted suicide. I can't believe I have to be here. I'm only here so my mom will shut up. Literally, that's what she said. And I would and this is the prep session. We do an hour-long prep session. I'm just like, okay, wow. All I can be is like be with this person as a loving presence. I can't push them. And I'm even thinking too, like, should we even do this? Kalita doesn't want to be here, and she's very resistant and super closed. And we're getting closer to the end of the prep session. And I was like, look, I need you, one, to look me in the eyes, right? Can you please look at me? You have to put your phone away too. You can't be on TikTok while we're doing this. And I need you at a minimum to set an intention with me, because this is really important work. Like, this is important for me. Like, I'm not just going to go into this. It's just with your soul. I didn't use the word soul, but like with you into an altered state, it's too risky, and we don't have to do this. So I need some connection from you and kind of like buy-in. And so I helped her to set an intention. The intention, and when I was with that, trying to get her to set an intention, she's like, whatever, I don't care. Whatever happens, I don't even care. Whatever. And I'm like, okay, so how about your intention is you're open to receiving? She's like, fine, I don't care. I'm like, all right, so this is your intention. Yes. Okay, fine. And then the ketamine begins to work, and she softens, totally softens. And she looks up and makes eye contact, and she smiles at me, which I didn't even think was ever going to be possible. Just like a soft little smile. And I was like, okay. And then I held space for the whole time. We worked through a couple of things. And then she's coming out of it on the other side. And she says, I feel like there's two sides of me. One side that wants to die and doesn't want to be here and hates everything. And one side that's maybe hopeful. And maybe I will do these studies to try to learn to walk again. Maybe I will. Maybe I will.
Wow.
And I did not think we would get there.
Wow.
And it was so powerful, the transformation. That was just, we were together for 2 hours. The prep session, I don't know what much was happening there besides kind of establishing rapport, because she was so, but wow, the ketamine, it just totally transformed her.
Oh my God. These are the stories I want to be hearing. Yeah, it's been interesting. It's funny because we have a common friend who shall not be named who sat with you and oh my God, I'm so used to calling him Trevor. Sat with you and Krishna.
You can say East Forest.
I know, I'm like Krishna, he's Forrest Trevor. When was that? A few years ago, and he, like me, had only done ketamine recreationally. Burning Man, parties, festivals, New York City back in the day. And he's like, Beth, you got to do this. And actually, I remember that I had talked to East Forest, and I was like, maybe I'll fly out to Boise and do this with you guys, because I have always been kind of like, I only relate to it as this like party drug, and I have heard miracle stories. I remember I went to the MAPS benefit in New York City in 2019 and saw someone speak from the VA. And that's when I was sold. I was like, whoa, like she had never seen these kind of results before. But our friend had said, like, this is very different. This was highly effective. It's made me feel really good for months at a time. But I don't think he was going and doing it every week or every month. It was kind of like one session,
I do
go
feel
deep,
like one
integrate. Yeah.
session can be highly effective and beneficial. People ask me that all the time. Like I'm doing consults with folks trying to figure out like, what should I do? What route is it for me? And often clinics will say, you do a series of 6 or something like that, or a series of 8. And I try to let people know it doesn't have to be that way. They just say that because that's what the research has been done on. The research has been done on a series. So then they say, well, this is what the research shows. But that's only because it's only been done on a series. From my own anecdotal experience, one session can be incredibly therapeutic. Like when I do the groups are 10 to 12 people. I have a co-facilitator, a psychologist that I work with at the clinic. And that's one session, one group session. I used to do a series when I first started. It was a series of 6. But that was during the pandemic, and it was easier for people to commit to that time. And now, it's just not. It's hard to do twice a week for 3 weeks or whatever it was. So one session even is highly beneficial, can be.
Amazing. Yeah. And I also want to talk to you about, because it sounds like, you're on this path, I think because of your background, all these years of yoga and embodiment work. It's interesting. I've had clients that have worked with ketamine clinics, some working for the big companies, we know who they are. And it's been very interesting to hear what's going on behind the scenes. One of my clients who no longer works for that company and has her own psychedelic integration coaching practice, but she said they wouldn't allow conversations around anything spiritual in the preparation, in the session, or the integration. It was actually just
Oh my
against.
gosh. Even just asking somebody, what is your spiritual inclination? That would be helpful information for the therapist to know.
You would
Like,
think.
are you Catholic? Are you Mormon? Are you atheist? Are you what? How do you relate to God or not? It's
You would
very
think.
useful information.
But they had this theory that, like, okay, we're just here to treat, depression or anxiety or PTSD, and we're not bringing up spirituality, even though, I'm like, even when I did it as a recreational drug, I would have these amazing spiritual experiences.
What if
That's how
the
I got onto
patient
this.
brings it up? You know what I mean? What if the patient brings it up? Or it's a resource for the patients.
Mm-hmm.
Out here in Idaho, so many of the people I see are Mormons or recovering
Oh,
Mormons.
wow.
And so they relate to like Jesus, And so I'll even like say, like, if part of my guidance is like helping them feel like the space is really contained and I'm there for them. And I'll say something like, if you work with something in the unseen that supports you, a deity, a god, an ancestor, a spirit animal, you can ask for that support.
Mm-hmm.
And if I know that they work with Jesus, it's like you could ask for Jesus to be there with you as you go into this space, or whoever it might be. And I'm so lucky at the Boise Ketamine Clinic, Nicole, So great. I love her so much. She just lets me do whatever I do. And so in some ways, I transferred or have transferred how I hold sacred space into what I do in the clinic. Like I set up an altar, I light my candles, I smudge. If the client patient wants smudging, which they almost always do, we pull cards. It's like this is a sacred container.
Mm-hmm.
And I do that not just for them, but for me as the guide. Like this, setting the space up that way helps me feel protected and anchored. I don't think I could do it without it.
Yeah, and this is where, so I have another client who is working in a smaller, locally based clinic, and she's very similar. She's actually more of a trained herbalist and a nurse practitioner and has a very deep spiritual path and psychedelic path. And she did the same thing. And it was interesting because we've talked about this idea of we could, approach ketamine therapy from this place of like, the old school way of doing, like kind of dry therapy. That's like you're in, you're out, you're gone. There's no body involved. There's no spirit involved. It's kind of like cookie cutter from what I would kind of consider the old way of doing things. And then there's people bringing this in where it's kind of, bringing in the ritual, bringing in other practices, turning it into, a deeper experience than just getting a drug and hoping that things change. And this is where I wonder, I personally believe everything is spirit. But we had this discussion about, well, is ketamine a spirit? Like, can it be approached from this spiritual
Regardless of whether or
experience?
not
Yeah.
ketamine's a spirit, you're going into your inner realms.
Mm,
And when you go inside, that is your unseen space of connecting to spirit.
mm-hmm.
So you're a spirit and it's taking you in there. So for me, it's definitely spiritual. I had someone
Mm-hmm.
ask me yesterday, what is spirituality to you? And I said something like that, like it's whatever's connecting me to the unseen, to my interior realm, to my heart
Mm-hmm.
also. Getting me out of my mind and into my heart. Whatever does that is spiritual.
Yeah. But I'm curious, what are your thoughts on these kind of and I really try to not judge what's quote right or wrong because who knows, what works for one might not work for someone else. But, about approaching it from this place of like, oh, this is just my antidepressant replacement. And now I'm going to do it like a drug with zero intention and zero help, zero integration and content. Because, you can get it in the mail now.
Yeah, I guess I'd say there's so many different pathways. And
Hmm.
so it could be that doing it like that really works for somebody. Or it's unbeknownst to them, their gateway into a more spiritual embodied life. Like they don't start there, but as they begin to use it regularly as their antidepressant, similarly with me with yoga, I didn't start that to do anything particular, but it changed my life. And so it could be then that it's held in that kind of like, I don't know, boxy kind of above ground way, but it's going to work on them anyways, on their spirit.
Mm,
Probably.
yeah. Yeah. No, and that's a good perspective. It's been interesting because I've heard some criticism about ketamine and the direction it's going in. And then of course I've heard and again, like I'm not an expert in this, but some criticism over the inaccessibility of it, meaning the high costs. A lot of people around this country who are in maybe places where there are no ketamine clinics and they have to order it by mail, and then it's this really high cost. But then I've heard the actual ketamine is actually a low cost product. Like physically, it's a very low cost. What do you think of this, and what do you know is going on to maybe make it a little more accessible to all people? Or do you think this is a supply and demand that maybe over time it's just going to lower in price and accessibility?
Perhaps supply and demand and lower over time as there's more clinics. It's true that it's a low cost item
Mhm.
off the shelf. The money that's associated with it, in my understanding, is more around the clinicalness of it. And so when you're in a clinic in an individual room, receiving your individual prescription. You have a nurse that's working with you. Like the highest cost is IV because it's more medicalized. You have to get, you're hooked up to oxygen and blood pressure and all that kind of stuff. And then it goes down a little bit when you do an IM, a shot. This is just the clinic I work with. Goes down, a few $100s when you're just doing the IM because it's not as clinical. And then below that is troches, the lozenges, because you don't have to do any of the same kind of clinical setup around it as you would do with an IV. And then the most affordable is the group. And that's one of the reasons that I do the group, is because it is a lot more accessible financially for people. And then the other cost when you're doing CAT or CAP is the cost of the therapist. So then that gets tacked on also. And it is, I guess for us here in Boise, our rates with the CAT and CAP is $200 an hour. So that gets added on top of whatever the cost of the, just the ketamine session, which is a lot for some people, but not everybody. We do, at least myself, have sliding scales and work with people in that way. And I guess that's the supply and demand. It's like maybe there'll be more therapists. One reason that it's so high is because it's so exhausting. Like I can't really see many people in a week because I can't handle it.
That was actually going to lead to my next question. It's interesting the amount of people that are really excited about psilocybin therapy. And I had an instance recently with someone who literally was just like, okay, where do I move? What do I do? How do I get involved? I just want to give this to people. And I was like, have you ever done this before? Do you know how long it lasts and how much potential trauma surfaces, that it's not like ketamine, and she was a doctor who prescribes ketamine, but doesn't actually do the ketamine sessions. So I think she didn't have a lot of awareness of how much energy is involved for the actual space holder.
Yeah. Somebody asked me a few days ago, they called and said, would you do a psilocybin ceremony with this person? And I was just like, no, I don't have the energy for it. I literally don't. I've done them before I do them, but I do them rarely. And it's kind of expensive almost because I don't want to do it. Not that I don't want to do it. It's just so much energetically. I know what it will take for me to do that. And it's not easy. I don't think it would be for anyone, to your point. It requires so much. Kind of like, East Forest, he gets offers to play and perform all the time. And it's like, he won't go out and perform unless he knows he's going to get paid well. Because otherwise he's like, I'd rather just stay home and make music. It's similar. It's so much. It's so much for the therapist.
Yeah. And it's funny because I did a whole podcast episode, I think a year and a half ago, saying it was called Why Trip Sitting is Not a Business, because, there's a lot of people out there trying to sell these like trip sitting courses and just be a trip sitter. And I get that, certain people just want to hold space for their friend, and there is a time and place for that. And there's no right or wrong. But when it comes to a therapeutic setting with someone who's actually processing through some, deep trauma, or, someone who has treatment resistant depression and is turning to high dose psilocybin, this is not something you do in a 2-hour session. This is like days, right? It's like an all day session. It's preparation. There's integration. And it's been funny because there's a lot of people that are, I think, and it's, I have so much reverence and gratitude for these sacred medicines that have changed my life, but there's a lot of this, idolizing the psychedelics and like the potential. And then it's like, well, wait a second. It's, yes, it's high priced because it takes the whole entire day, and you don't want to do one of those 5 days a week. Yeah. What do you say to these people? Because it is, being like, I have a Facebook group, I have this whole community. So many people are like, I want to be a psychedelic assisted therapist, whether it's above ground or underground. What do you suggest for them? Yeah.
I would suggest another modality. And additionally, like I had a gentleman reach out this summer, and he wanted me to sit for him for a psilocybin ceremony. And after doing like a short consult with him, one, you're not just going to do that with a stranger off the street, right? So you have to establish a relationship. At least that's how I feel. I'm not going to have somebody call me and then the next day do mushrooms with them. But I said, I think what you actually need, or what could be beneficial, is more of the somatic healing first. Like, let's just have some of those sessions for a while. And because I think we could move you along with what the healing you're asking for without the psilocybin, even just if we're doing the trauma healing. And then we'll see if maybe down the road psilocybin would be good for you. And we're a good fit together to have that kind of experience. So more of that. Similar. Somebody wanted me to work with their son with MDMA. And again, I said, no, I'm not going to just do an MDMA session with your son. We have to establish the relationship first. I need to know so much about them and their goals and what's going on. And maybe we can do a lot of really good healing without the MDMA.
Yeah.
So the somatic experiencing is awesome. And you don't have to be a licensed therapist to get accepted into the training program. You can be someone like myself who's a coach and a yoga teacher, or even a massage therapist, or maybe you are a licensed therapist or a doctor. But having that awareness and ability to work with people through their bodies with their trauma healing, that's the work.
Not only the work, the effective work.
That's the effective
Meaning it's
work.
like, this is the effectiveness. I can't tell you the amount of emails I have where strangers from the internet ask me, for therapy, psychedelic therapy or underground psychedelics. And I just copy and paste. I have this email that's already pre-written, and it's, here's my list of recommended somatic therapists. I would go into this first because honestly, I don't believe the psychedelics fix anything without addressing the somatic piece. And if you're not already doing that work, and I've experienced this myself where I was like totally disembodied, and then the psychedelic experience was just a mess. And did it help me heal anything? I'm not sure, but when I got into regular somatic therapy, which I would call psychedelic integration, that's when the healing started to happen. And I actually say the same thing too when people ask about training programs. I say, look, I would actually start with something like, whatever, Hakomi or Somatic Experiencing, one of these training programs where it doesn't take, 5 years, and get that as a solid foundation first. And then maybe see, and then work with people and see then what it's like. But I think there's a lot of realities, even with ketamine assisted therapy, that people don't really know about. And I've now found a couple websites in Oregon that talk about the realities of being a psilocybin assisted therapist and how you might get bored. I mean, that's the one and only real therapy session I've had with psilocybin, was with my therapist, who's amazing. And she's also a very close friend. But I kept thinking to myself, like afterwards, I'm like, that must've been so boring for her. Like just sitting there taking notes for hours, like just hanging out.
One of the things that makes it so hard in the therapeutic session is, while nothing might be going on, let's say, you might be quiet, the patient might be quiet and internal, you have to be ready for anything at any moment.
Yeah.
As the therapist, you never know when things are going to turn. So you really can't, in a way, let your guard down or relax or distract yourself when they're still and quiet, because it could shift so quickly. And I found that where I'll go into a session thinking like, oh, it's going to be like this, or this might be easy today or whatever. And it is not that way at all. It's not that way at all. So energetically holding space like that, even if it's quiet, takes so much presence on the part of the therapist. You're really present, more present than you are probably in a lot of parts of your day during those sessions. Your presence is just, I use, honestly, in those quiet times, I'll do mantra repetition. So that kind of helps me as a therapist.
Yeah. And also the space, I'm sure.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, I want to ask your views on, like you've been around this, I refuse to call it industry, but now people are just calling it an industry, but this ecosystem, the psychedelic ecosystem for a while, and on some level I have too, maybe not, working in it as intensely, but What are your views on the direction things are going when it comes to, people patenting psilocybin strains and venture capital and new businesses and people trying to make purgeless ayahuasca chocolates and, acid that doesn't make you see visuals? I mean, I've now heard everything. I can't even keep up with it. Um, where do you think this is all going? And do you feel that it's heading in a positive direction in general?
I feel like right now it's somewhat of a mess, right? Like everything is just happening and everybody's in it, and everybody's, in a way, it's a creative act. So everybody's being super creative with it. What's possible? What could happen? Where can we take this? Nobody knows anything. Nobody knows where it's going, really. But the energy of it is the medicine's wanting to get out. The medicines should be legal. They should be accessible. People should be able to explore their consciousness by choice. And so I hope it's going towards accessibility and legalization. And then I think, like many things, it'll peak in some way. Like, I don't want to use the word fad, but I will, but kind of like a fad. It's like super hot right now. And then it'll find its place. So now it's just like this chaotic mess. Everything's exploding. Everybody's trying to find everything or do everything. There's people all over trying to get into it. And already I'm witnessing them fall away and taper off, and disappear. A lot of the early quick starters. And so what will have longevity? And what will have longevity is hopefully those that really have heart and truth and the desire to heal, that it's not just about the money, though probably the money folks will last too, just because they always seem to in some way. So we'll have to deal with them, probably always ongoing. But then the heart will stay. The practices that actually heal, the trainings that are actually working and valuable will stick around. That's what I would think. Because if it's not working, it's not going to last.
True, right? That's a good perspective. Yeah. And I'm trying to, just really have a lot of prayers and hope, because I do agree that this should be available to anybody. I do believe it should be fully legal in all capacities, by the way. This is the one thing I'm having some personal issues with, is, trying to then regulate like plant medicines that I do feel like should be able to be freely worked with in a ceremonial setting without a licensed, regulated, facilitator that's, kept track of by the state. I'm like, well, there's indigenous practices that have been happening for, millennia, and we're not allowed to practice that, even with some of these laws that are being passed. But, we'll see. And
My
I do
thought with
agree.
that is
Yeah.
that, like, the undergrounds will get safer. Like, even though they say it's not legal to practice with whatever indigenous tradition, because everything else is legal, that'll be fine too.
That's what I'm hoping. Like the overall
Mm-hmm.
risk is reduced, and maybe it's just gonna naturally, like you said, it's gonna certain people will be drawn to one path versus the other. Maybe it'll open up new beginnings, new openings for both paths, and we'll see. But it's just been interesting, and I do agree that the heart is always what's going to be left there. But I do want to leave some space to ask you about journey space and what's going on with that, because this has actually come up as well with, I have some clients that do breath work or psychedelic work or psychedelic assisted therapy. And this topic of music and setting has come up a lot. And it's interesting. One of my clients was actually recently asked to create unique music for breath work groups, because he helps facilitate it and as part of some of these breath work trainings. And it was the same idea as like, well, Spotify only goes so far. Um, yeah, tell us about Journey Space and what the intention is and where it's going and how it's going now and where it's going to grow into.
Sure. Journey Space is an offshoot of Growing Heart Sanctuary, Growing Heart Farm. That is has been a place for, almost 2 decades for in-person healing with plant medicines, where East Forest got its start a long time ago. And during the pandemic, right in the beginning, March 2020, our good friend Lewis, who runs that, reached out to East Forest and said, we're now doing an online ceremony. Like when everything first popped online back then, like literally the end of March, so early on. And he's like, I don't know how to do that. I've never done that before. I don't want to do that. And Lewis like, nope, the date's set. People are coming. Figure it out.
I was there.
And so we did. We figured it out. And we had the first ever online East Forest ceremony, some specifically for that container of Growing Heart Farm, but also live streamed through YouTube that anybody could join. And it was really successful. There were thousands of people that were actually on. And then we continued to do those regularly. East Forest did them maybe every quarter or so, and then partnered with the farm. And about a year of that, things started to settle down a little bit more with the pandemic, etc. And the idea of Journey Space was born. What if we could continue to have these online facilitated global ceremonies, group ceremonies, because of the accessibility piece? People can join with whatever medicine they'd like to have. They can join from the privacy of their own home. They don't have to travel anywhere. It's really low cost. And so Journey Space was group ceremonies with an hour-long preparation. Well, first we send everybody preparation material. And the big thing at that time, because it was like the summer of 2021, we were working with Plant Medicine Law Group. And they literally were like, you cannot say the word psychedelics anywhere. We got high-level advice. Do not use the word psychedelics. And that was kind of crippling, I felt. I didn't like that at all. I'm like, why can't we just say what we're doing? Nope, can't say it. You can only allude to it. So then we used the word journey or medicine or growth or transformation or whatever. On the website, everything kind of had to be, couldn't be direct, which was annoying to me. And it's true, it didn't have to be psychedelics. It could be a breath work or a meditation, however anybody wanted to enter into that shared space. But then we'd create all this prep material for, again, psychedelics, not able to say the word psychedelics. And we couldn't give, and we still can't give, explicit dosage recommendations because it's not legal. Right?
Really? Oh my God.
Yeah. And so we can give sort of like high level recommendations, or you can say something like, well, what people would do in that scenario versus what you should do. So we're not able through Journey Space to give that, though you could do some one-on-one coaching and maybe get some more direct guidance. But in the group setting, it's more generalized, and it has to be, we have a list of like contraindications. If this is happening to you in your history, you are not a good candidate for this. And so people have to like self-select that that's not them, is one of the entries into joining a journey. So that safety net is in place. And then, of course, the big question, which I was always too like, well, what do you do if somebody does have a hard time because you're not with them? And so we have policies and guidance for that, of like for their own setup, what their safety net is. And then, of course, partnering with Fireside Project, who we love so much, which is the peer-to-peer support trip line that you can call anytime. You can call Fireside. And Journey Space has its own chat box and phone line. And so people during journeys have called in for support. And the facilitators, usually it's myself, Lewis or Janny, Darut perhaps, or Drew, that's there. And so one of us is guiding, facilitating. Lewis is kind of doing the back end tech stuff. And in the beginning, East Forest would do a lot of the music live and recording that music. And so there's an arm of Journey Space that's online facilitated group ceremonies. And those have been almost monthly since the summer of 2021. And then the other side of it is the music library, where, to your point about Spotify, most people do use Spotify. I myself use Spotify to guide ceremonies or classes, but you're getting kind of a hodgepodge of artists and then energies. And I've had East Forest in a group session of mine, a ketamine group session, where I used, this was early on, a Spotify playlist that wasn't his music. And he gave the feedback that every time the music changed, it was like you're reorienting to like, who's this, where is this going? when you're in the journey. It's like you enter a new room and it kind of shifts you. And so with Journey Space, it's all unreleased East Forest ceremony music that's cohesive from start to finish.
Yeah.
It's one artist, one thematic landscape, one musician who knows what they're doing. You know, you think of Wave Paths too. Wave Paths is also somewhat of a hodgepodge, where he's a contributor to Wave Paths. He made music pieces for it. And Wave Paths is like all these amazing musicians across the globe who then would write like, give me your piano piece, give me your violin piece, give me your synth piece, you write a guitar piece, you do some vocals here. So it's just a mixture of different artists piled on top of each other is what Wave Paths is. It's not an East Forest track. And maybe an East Forest piano line in it. So that with Journey Space, it's one way that it's different, is that it's a cohesive musical piece to guide you from start to finish. And also his music is made for that space. He made it for the psilocybin or the psychedelic space. Whereas, you know, you might pull, I don't know, a track from Bonobo. He didn't make that for psilocybin. It can work, sure, but it's not intentionally by the artist made for that. And then the other piece to it is those, if you think, you mentioned before the high cost of these experiences, one of the central piece to guiding it is the music. And the musician who's created this body of work to guide your client or patient isn't getting compensated actually for the central role that they play. Whereas with, you know, in restaurants or shops or whatever, if they're playing music overhead, if you're hearing music in a restaurant, they're going through a platform that pays royalty fees to each artist for each song that you play. That doesn't happen with Spotify at all. And so Journey Space is kind of like the licensing platform for the psychedelic space, where the musician will get compensated. Not in a big way at all. But it's more than Spotify. You know, even if every psychedelic therapist or guide gave $1, you know, per session to the artist for using their music as a central tool, almost in some ways they couldn't do it without it, would be kind of nice. Krishna says too, he says, when I made music for mushrooms, this psychedelic therapy space didn't exist.
Yeah.
He made it for individuals to use. He didn't actually make it for clinics to use to then make a lot of money off of.
Yeah. So many good points. I know, especially Spotify is what, like 0.001 cent per play or something. I mean, it's kind of ridiculous.
You have to get like 1,000+ plays to make $1 on Spotify. And not that it's all about money, but it is an energetic exchange. Yeah. And I've witnessed Krishna face to face. Some people come up to him. We were at the Horizons Portland conference, and he's like, they were like, oh, we use your music all the time. We love it. It helps our clients so much. And he's like, great, I've got Journey Space you could use for your sessions. And they're like, oh no, we love Spotify. It's just, they don't know. They don't think of it in that way. It really is a learning curve.
I think it's so important when you mention too, is that it's, first of all, in my experience, I have no idea where my therapist got the music. I was like, oh, I'm so glad she's not playing Spotify, because I actually am hypersensitive, especially with music. And if it shifts from like, I don't know, you play an Icaro and then you play some electronic, and I can't do that. Like it's never been my jam. It's probably why I'm called more towards like very traditional ayahuasca spaces. But mine, you know, she played these long, extended, instrumental only. And I don't know where she got it, but she's been also doing this for 15, 20 years. And it made a big difference. But I think if I had been, you know, on that level of doing psilocybin therapy and it was just a Spotify playlist, I actually would have rather just had silence.
Yeah.
And I do think there's something to that. And that's why I'm like, I think there's a huge market for the Journey Space, because music is the key. You know, it's huge. And I think people underestimate like the importance of actually curating it with especially, you know, you have to know your strain and how it works and where are the waves coming in. And, you know, it's like there is like a, psilocybin's somewhat consistent with how it works, and we can't just like throw a random like hit shuffle.
Yeah, and
I don't.
some therapists have bad musical taste.
Well, yeah, that too.
They don't know what they're doing. They might have never even, they don't even have a Spotify subscription, right? And then they're getting into therapy like, oh, I got to use music. I guess I got to figure this out. And they just put stuff together. So there's that piece of it too. It could just not be always the best music. They don't know. They think it is good music.
If you're paying a couple $1,000s for your session or whatever people are charging these days, please, like, I agree. Like, this is the least one could do is have some nice curated music, give the artist back some money. But I have faith in Journey Space. I know everybody involved. They're all good people. I've tested it myself, and I can't wait to see where this grows. Speaking of which, before we go, I want to hear a little bit about what do you have coming up this year? You're up to so much and like have your hands in every realm. Any things we can be looking out for or big projects?
I am feeling a newfound space of freedom and spaciousness. My daughter went to college this fall, and I graduated my last group of 300-hour yoga teacher training students, and I didn't start another cohort of teaching yoga teachers. And so I'm just like, I'm going to go on vacation. I'm going to get my schedule figured out. I'm not going to plan anything that big. And so I'm doing some things like I'm going to teach at Yoga Fort for True Fort Music Fest. And Christian and I will do a few dates here and there. Usually when East Forest goes on the road, I'm with him. So there's that. And just seeing clients here in Boise at the Ketamine Clinic, doing more of the integration and coaching and mentoring, which I love. I do a lot of that on Zoom or over the phone. The Somatic Experiencing actually works really well, even just over the phone. It doesn't have to be in person. And then myself, I'm just trying to hold back the tide and be as spacious as possible. I'll probably begin to create some content for Journey Space, especially around the somatic piece that we touched on. So maybe some content creation, but we'll see. We'll see. I'm planning a retreat for this fall to Nosara, Costa Rica, which is where my yoga lineage is from, to be with my teachers. And so that's kind of in the work that I'm excited about. That has nothing to do with like the psychedelic or the music realm at all. It's just like back to my roots. So I'm thrilled for that. And then we're going to teach at the Ram Dass retreat again, Christian and I, this August. We'll be at Esalen again too in the end of June, early July, June 30th through July 4th. That's going to actually get launched today. Sign-ups for that. So retreats here and there, offerings, but also just really enjoying some space.
That's nice. So good, especially off to college, some freedom. Yes, you deserve it. And yeah, there's all the time in the world. And I mean, even with all that space, there's a lot going on. So oh, well, Radha, it was so nice to have you here. And thank you so much. You've actually helped me kind of shift my perspective, because I've been having struggles feeling like, oh, I don't know what I think about ketamine, not sure about this. But thank you so much for shedding such light on it, and also really doing this good work with the ketamine, the somatic work, the yoga, this path, and really holding this amazing space for so many people.
Thank you, Beth. It's been an honor. I've really enjoyed connecting with you more. Thank you so much.
Thank you.